a study of systematic and phonological verbal fluency in Alzheimer's disease by Sophia, Leah, and Madeline. Provide some background and clearly explain the theological framework. According to our article, among the cognitive markers in Alzheimer's disease, verbal fluency seems to be an early indicator of deterioration. Catching Alzheimer's can be difficult, and looking at the difference in somatic and phonological verbal fluency can be a key sign to see if someone will develop Alzheimer's later in life. The main objective of this article is to find out whether it is phonological or semantic verbal fluency that deteriorates earlier in Alzheimer's disease. What are the study's research questions and hypotheses? The study's research questions are involved with figuring out whether someone has AD based on verbal fluency. The study also indicates facts about verbal fluency based on sex and educational status. The aim of this research is to first evaluate verbal fluency in people with Alzheimer's disease to know which of them deteriorates earlier, and second, to confirm or not the possible influence of other variables such as gender and educational level on task performance.
What experimental methods did they use? Use words like between or within subjects, correlational eye tracking, self-report. In this research study, 60 people were divided into two groups, the experimental and control group. The members of the experimental group had to be over 65 years old and have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's diseases in early stage. The controlled group also had to be over 65 years old and needed to have an MMSE score at or higher than 26. In this screening test, individuals were evaluated by a psychologist who administered the questionnaires in this particular order. 1. MMSE Mini Mental State Examination. 2. MOCA Montreal Cognitive Assessment. 3. Verbal Fluency Test. These tests were completed in a private room to avoid distractions. The last method used is the MANOVA to analyze whether the level of educational level influenced verbal fluency performance. And MANOVA was performed having educational level divided into three groups: elementary, primary, and higher level, as independent variable in verbal fluency and as the dependent variable. What did the authors find, and did it support their initial hypothesis? After analyzing the data, statistically significant differences were found between higher and primary educational levels and between higher and basic educational levels for both phonological fluency and semantic fluency. The results show that experimental group performed worse than the control group in both types of fluency. Our findings indicated that the experimental group had slightly higher SVF scores than the PFP group, but no statistically significant differences were observed. The experimental group might be in an early stage of Alzheimer's disease, which means that they do not yet have significant cognitive impairments, as shown by their mean MMSE score of 23.53. Likewise, he related the MMSE and the two VF modalities, finding a positive correlation in the fourth passage between said questionnaire and PFP, concluding that the screening test predicts the performance of subjects in this type of fluency. In the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, patients begin producing less words in both semantic and phonological fluency. The results of this research are not conclusive regarding the gender variable. In both groups, males scored higher in both types of fluency than females, but the differences were not statistically significant. According to their study, women performed better on semantic categories of fruits than men on tools. These findings emphasize the importance of word retrieval through mental imagery strategies in settings, habits, and occupations, such as working in a factory or buying fruit at home. This article, on the other hand, argues that women's lower levels of schooling explain these lower fluency test scores. There was only one woman among the 7 subjects with higher education. Education level can be related to VF scores, with people with higher education producing more words in both types of fluency.
What do the author's findings mean? The authors found no significant gender differences. Males scored higher in both categories, although it was not significantly. And inconclusiveness of results may be due to the fact that patients are in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease and do not yet present significant cognitive impairments. People with a higher education level also obtained better verbal fluency scores. Subjects with higher education produced more words in both types of fluency than those with a basic or elementary education. The author's findings suggest a positive correlation between level of education and semantic verbal fluency, which is supported by other cited studies suggesting a positive correlation between level of education and cognitive reserve. What are the real-world implications for the author's findings? The authors found that linguistic alterations appear as a symptom in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, so it's important to focus on this along with the more known symptoms such as memory loss. This also means that verbal fluency tests should be included to make early diagnosis to address and treat symptoms as soon as possible. Our discussion questions for the class are: why do you think in this article it is found that people with higher education levels have better verbal fluency scores? And do you think verbal fluency tests should always be included in Alzheimer's assessments?